Welcome to Office Hours. This is an Institute of Play program dedicated to supporting projects at the intersection of games and learning. I'm Amna Siddiqui, the Community Manager for Institute of Play. Office Hours is our response to one-way, oftentimes static webinars. We're interested in hearing from you face-to-face, and we're able to do this by sending you the actual link to our Google Hangout. So join our conversation, share your project, and let us know how we can help you further your work. Now let's meet today's Office Hour leads, MJ, Dan, and John. Could all of you briefly talk about what you do and share your areas of expertise?
Sure. So I'm MJ. I'm out here in California, and I'm the game director at GlassLab, which is a part of Institute of Play that's making digital games for use in the classroom. And my background is in digital games. I've been making entertainment software for about 20 years.
I'm John. I am a game designer at Chicago Quest, so I work with
projects at the intersection of games and learning.
So I work with teachers and curriculum specialists to design digital and analog games for the classroom.
Oh, Dan, I think you're muted.
Hi, I'm Daniel O'Keefe, and I was muted. So I work for Institute of Play, and I'm embedded at Quest to Learn New York City Public School. I'm a learning designer, and I mainly work, most of my time I spend working with all of the teachers at Quest to Learn School, along with game designers, to design the game-like curriculum at Quest to Learn, which involves games, but is not just games. And my background is as a middle school mathematics teacher.
Awesome. And before we get started, I want to quickly share the 3 ways you can participate today. You're invited to watch, submit a question using the form under this video player, or join our live Hangout. So to join the panel, request a walk-in using the same form below, providing a brief description of your project or challenge. And keep in mind that not all walk-ins will be accepted. If your walk-in request is approved, you will receive a link via email to the Hangout. And additional details about what I've just explained are available at the bottom of this page. So let's get started and meet today's guests. We have Kirsten and Jared. And before we get into their questions and challenges, how about both of you tell us a little bit about yourselves and an overview of the projects that you're here to discuss with our Office Hour leads. Kirsten, can we start with you?
Absolutely, you can start with me. So my name's Dr. Kirsten Milliken, and I'm up in Portland, Maine, and my company is called PlayDHD. And the company was actually launched in March, and is kind of this long-time project that I've been working on because I've been working as a psychologist in the field of ADHD for a long time, and kind of through my education started thinking about the fact that people with ADHD really struggle with 3 big areas, and there are many others, but attention, motivation, and interest. And that's particularly true when you're an adult, and especially at work. And that when we're talking about play, we're talking also about having a good amount of attention, motivation, and interest. And so it only made sense that if I'm working with adults who have ADHD and we want to improve those things, if we have something to talk about that's play, then it kind of makes sense. Part of and so that's been launched, but now we're also in the midst of rebranding. So that's part of what I'll be talking about in a little while.
Great. And Jared, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. My name is Jared Koslich. I'm a founder of the Puzzle School, which is basically exploring the idea that you can learn something very effectively by figuring it out. So by being presented with challenges that start off very easy and get progressively harder, where you have high-quality feedback loops and hints, and even explicit content to help you along the way. But at the end of the day, each challenge you're sort of figuring out the learning rather than being taught the learning. And that this format is a fun and engaging format because you're actually trying to use the content in order to solve toward a goal to solve a challenge, rather than simply just trying to memorize or learn the content. And we're trying to create, sort of fun puzzle games to explore a wide range of subjects in this format, basically.
Cool. So let's go back to you, Kirsten. what was the motivation behind creating Play ADHD? And could you also talk about your long-term goals and the rebranding that you just mentioned?
Absolutely. So my motivation was that I've been working with teenagers and adults, and I really wanted to offer more services for adults because it has become a huge issue with adults becoming diagnosed with ADHD later in life and not really having the right providers or the right tools to manage that. As you get older, sometimes it gets a lot harder. We've had time to kind of gather some skills to ourselves, but there can be other challenges, especially when it comes to work. So people with ADHD have a much higher rate of job turnover and getting fired, unfortunately, for various reasons, as well as a lot of other problems. So I wanted a way to work with adults, but I also needed to be entertained because, quite frankly, I get bored. I have ADHD. And so one of my highest values really is around play, having fun, no matter what I'm doing. And so I thought, well, as I explained earlier, that the play naturally fit into this whole idea of optimizing your skills when you have ADHD and optimizing them consistently, because one of the frustrations of ADHD is while you can be really on and highly functioning, really creative, very productive and efficient, at some times when you are bored and disinterested and not motivated, you are going to feel like you're banging your head against the wall. So trying to help adults create ways to kind of get a more playful mindset when they are in those kind of repetitive tasks or they're facing some kind of demand that really isn't that interesting to them. So thankfully, my office was next door to a marketing agency, and a friend of mine, as I was describing this project, said to me, Play ADHD. And so I said, that's the name of it. That makes sense. And I'm finding that people who have ADHD or know about it, have thought about it, kind of get that name. And then I'm now working with somebody who is taking a look at everything that I want to do with this business and trying to help me with branding and the business plan and all this kind of stuff. And we want to make sure that we're hitting adults too that may have attentional issues, may never want to get diagnosed, and even if they got the diagnosis, would never want to admit it. So we want to be also hitting those adults as well, because they're going to be struggling with some of the same issues as an adult who has been diagnosed or knows that they have those struggles. So I went in and created our website on Squarespace, which I love, but it was somewhat limited, and I wanted to upgrade a little bit. So we're working on that right now, and also trying to figure out really how to brand ourselves and market ourselves so that we are both addressing the crowd that's looking for ADHD services to inspire them and get them going, but also, again, that larger crowd. So it's kind of doing this little dance, how much do we include ADHD versus not including it? I know, I've told you, I don't know if the rest of you have read this, but when I saw your play at your org portion of the Institute of Play, I thought, oh my God, I need to learn from these guys, because one of our long-term goals is to have events for adults, whether those are online events, brief events in person, or ultimately we want to have long weekend, several day long events where adults are really learning about their ADHD. They're learning also about play as an adult in all its different formats. So whether it's social or digital or more active and creative kinds of play, but knowing how to present that in a way that is received well by the adults. And of course, I saw the office hours where they were showing when you guys did the work with, or when that group did the work with the museum, and how receptive that group was to playing. So I just wanted to hear some ideas about what you think might be a central component to what I call re-educating adults about how to play. and any thoughts that you've got about branding so that we're putting ourselves out there in a way that's accessible and attractive for adults.
Does anyone want to take that?
No takers.
Oop, Dan, I think you're muted.
Hi, my name is Mute. I mean, so yeah, I think that I can start to approach the question of how do we help adults play. I guess I have two initial reactions, a couple questions too, but
Yeah.
so I'll just describe a bit of what I do for this. So, I mean, we're trying to, mainly I'll speak about my experience at Quest to Learn School. We're trying to have teachers want students to become risk takers and playful learners. In order to do that, we think that we have to help teachers become risk takers and playful learners, which is not necessarily easy for everyone. So we've actually gone through a lot of different processes where we've tried to do that. I'm not going to necessarily say like how we've done that yet or anything. I just want to provide the context that's what I think of immediately when you talk about adult learning. I think about the teachers that I work with day to day and how we've tried to make things that can seem actually quite horrendous, like dealing with the logistics of a Department of Education schedule and the new Chancellor guidelines that are incredibly boring, and how we can try and get engagement around something. The other part of what you're saying, sorry, I'm writing notes to myself here. Oh, actually, before I go forward, I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit of what types of projects you're already doing with adults, and whether you facilitate them already, or whether they're, you know what I mean? Like I understand your extent, but I don't yet understand what you do.
Right. So right now, what we have on playdhd.com is a series of interviews that we've done with individuals who are experts in play, ADHD, and or both. So we have those going on as kind of just for entertainment value and for educational value, to be thinking about how other people are doing this. And then I'm actually in the process of building an app that has to do with having plans to play, and writing a book, of course. And then we're going to move into developing these events. Right now, I'm doing local events in Portland, Maine. Doing one next week that has to do just with introduce under the campaign called Why Play. And then that will be leading into more, so that's going to be a very general kind of presentation, and then we're going to be offering events where people can come and literally just play in a specific field of, you know, whether it's going to be a social play event or a digital play event or something like that. And then, of course, there are the national presentations that I'm doing at the ADHD conferences. So.
One other thing I was going to mention, well, thank you, about the word play itself, is that, I mean, you made me think of the interesting, like, fine line between work and play that can sometimes exist. And so when we say we want people to, teachers and students to become playful learners or to play all the time, that sometimes means working.
Right.
Because, like, tinkering, facing a challenge, taking on an identity, if it's a professional identity or some other authentic identity, that can be play too, right? So there's all these different kind of images that you can think of when you think of someone playing, and I wonder whether, are you going towards a certain, because I know you're trying to, one of the things you mentioned was you're trying to have people who are bored at work not be bored at work, but still work. I guess.
Right.
So I can think of like different ways to go, right? One is that you gamify the work or something. There's badges and there's levels and there's all that stuff, which I'm not like criticizing or anything.
Right.
And then there's the like, can it be purely fun in some way? And then there's the portion where you might have it be much more of just a more interesting challenge. Like, is the work actually boring? Is there a way for your work to become actually an interesting thing to play with?
Right.
So I guess
that's a lot of what we're looking for. So yeah.
Dan, you're sort of suggesting that as like an individual strategy as opposed to an organizational strategy. Is that what you're getting at? Or both?
Right there, yeah, I'm not sure which one I was going for. I was just trying to kind of parse out the different ways we think about play when we start to talk about it.
One of the things that I was talking about was like internal play, like where we kind of challenge ourselves. We set like 2 different goals for ourselves and play them out against each other and things like that. And then also maybe it's going and talking to somebody else in the next cubicle about what you're doing so that you start invigorating yourself about, thinking about it differently. So which sounds like it's maybe along the lines of what you're talking about, Dan.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question of you, Dan, is I think there's a thing that happens when you've been doing game design for as many years as I have, which is a lot, where you start to see the whole world with a sort of game overlay, and or as I like to say, all the world's a game, and all the men and women merely players. There's something about that might be quite powerful for the people that you're working with to say, because a lot of the little things like setting a goal, understanding the mechanics behind the goal, how do I get there, what about that is sort of fun on a different level than the way that it's supposed to be fun, which is actually good. I'm just totally brainstorming based on what you've been saying.
Yeah.
But it seems like an opportunity to build that as a force of habit, where you're sort of seeking the game-like elements of your daily experience.
Oh, that's brilliant. I like that idea. I mean, because one of the things that I'm talking to people about is paying attention to things differently. And if somebody says, like, this is your task and this is the way we've always done it, it doesn't mean that has to be the way you do it, especially if it's not fun. So figuring out how can you make it fun? How can you make it more interesting so that you're interested, motivated, and wanting to pay attention to it? So that's a great idea, MJ. Thank you.
I think there would be a relationship there too with what we do here at Quest to Learn, which would be systems thinking, in that it's a big topic. I won't get all into it, but like you can think of games as systems, and games are actually really great models of systems. They have components, they have mechanics, they have rules, they have a space, they have all these things. Kind of what I think, MJ, what you're describing as the kinds of things that you can see in the world around you. Whether that's an overlay or not, but we try to encourage the students and teachers to see themselves as part of a system, and what is the system in which I'm in now, and how sometimes how can I game that system. So I'm not really going anywhere final there. I just want to throw out there that like we're also talking about systems there when we start to talk about seeing the world as a game around us.
Right.
I don't know, just jump in. I'm not the expert, obviously, on this stuff, but a lot of the research that I've been doing is around developing hypotheses and testing those hypotheses, and how addicting and fun it actually is to develop and test hypotheses. And I think that's kind of, when you were talking about trying to figure out how to make something more fun, approaching it from a perspective of not just figuring it out, but also sort of like validating that process, like trying to say, like, figure out ways of testing the hypothesis you have about whether it's fun or not, basically. I found it to be an amazing way to make everything engaging, is try to create environments where it's easier to develop hypotheses and test those hypotheses. And the real world is a little bit more of a complicated environment to do that in, but if you get trained in doing it, like I find myself doing it all the time now. I'm walking to work and I'm testing hypotheses about how I should move my legs to be more efficient, and it's more fun to walk to work now, sort of thing. So
right.
once you get good at it, it becomes a really fascinating approach, basically. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
And one of the tricky things, and something that you could that you could focus on maybe is like making, whether it's like constantly thinking of hypotheses and testing them, or thinking of everything around you as a game or a system, like making that sort of thinking a habit. And I don't know, that's kind of a tricky thing to like encourage people or like train people to do, but that like is probably like, I don't know, that seems like that's like the core of what maybe you could help people with.
I mean, that's one of the sticking points, that, adults here play, and of course they think, I can't be playing, I have to be working, and it's also getting over the fear of not doing it the way they're supposed to be doing it, or maybe making a mistake, or, having something fail and not realizing that there's a learning opportunity there. So I find, like, we get so serious as adults and we have to get it right and we have to do it this way, that's one of the barriers that we're going to come up against with some people.
Yeah, you just gave kind of a nice description of game-like learning. That's an Institute of Play term, game-like learning. That failure is okay, experimentation is appropriate. It's playful, and all the things that means. I have a couple of questions. Sorry, did you want to follow on to that, Dan?
Just very surely, I'll also refer to kind of like the flip side of that I think you also referred to, Kirsten, is that, and Jared, I think you referred to this as well, that like, yes, failure is great to experience and for the goal of learning and everything, but there are some situations where failure actually is failure, and like can be quite dangerous, so especially in an adult work life, say the military or whatever, failure means more than just failure to learn. So
right.
That's it, MJ.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, also that.
Well, I mean, it really affects the way the teachers approach risk-taking in their teaching. Like, I can't fail this particular, when I say I fail this student, not like that they get a failing grade, but I can't fail this student, because this student is just as meaningful as the student next year after my iteration has happened.
Right.
Mm. I had a couple questions for Kirsten, and you may not know, but this is coming totally out of my background as a digital game, person. But do you have any sense of like you talked about diagnostic as being one of your big kind of barriers, like people that don't diagnose or don't want to be diagnosed, that kind of thing?
Yep.
Do you have any sense of like whether digital games are being used for that? And the reason I ask is I think it would be very interesting to just query these people with what kind of games they play. Without necessarily giving them any particular game.
Right.
Because one of the things that I've observed in, as a person who's been in the commercial games business for literally 20 years, is this expansion of the market into much older people, right, into actual adults.
Right.
But adults play something very differently, and they tend to play games that are much more Zen-like, alpha state, what kids would describe as boring, right?
Yeah.
Whereas kids want to be more sort of continuously engaged and see more variety and surprise and that kind of thing. And so I'd be very curious to see whether an adult, and I by the way, I have no scientific basis for asking this question, but whether an adult has a different set of games that they'd be interested in playing, and whether that is in some way diagnostic. And then the second thing would be, again, just a question and maybe just a point of research rather than something we'd answer today. But there is this notion, particularly with digital games, of games as therapy. And so there's like a great example that's very off topic for you, but might be inspirational, is there's something called Snow World, which is literally a virtual snowball fight that they have people play while they're getting very badly burned, getting those treated. And it turns out that decreases the pain dramatically for those folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, there may be something that's already being worked on in this space, or maybe something that you want to somehow engage. But I can definitely imagine games that are not only diagnostic but also therapeutic that are digital, and that especially if they give the right kind of feedback. Like, here's this is working for you.
When you say diagnostic, can you tell me what you mean by that?
Sure. I'll give an example. Like, we're working right now a lot with SimCity. That's what the GlassLab current project is. And a lot of folks are familiar with SimCity. It's this big open space. You can do all kinds of things. and we're doing it with kids, but we're able to look at their behavior through the well, we have tracking, right, watching everything a kid does. And we can actually look at patterns in that behavior and see whether a kid is kind of being random, like all over the map, or whether they're being focused in their effort. And that actually just emerges out of the analytics we can do on the data. And so that would be a really interesting diagnostic maybe to do even on an adult, to say, here's some city, go build a big city, see what you do. And I don't know, again, I don't know if this is true, but it'd be really interesting to do a correlative study to say, if we looked at that data, one versus the person who's diagnosed ADHD versus the person who's not, can we bucket those into different analytics? And can you just then take your clients and just hand them SimCity and have them play for 45 minutes and essentially have a diagnostic at the end of that experience?
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
it would be interesting.
It's just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sounds much more fun than doing a WACE, an IQ test on them. So.
Well, yes.
Definitely. So, I have a question right now. I want to know how you guys play. MJ.
How do we play?
How do you play? Yep, as an adult, how would you say you play?
Kind of all the time, actually.
Yeah, but in what way? What's your favorite way?
My favorite way to play?
Yeah.
Oh, my favorite way to play is inventing games with my little girl who's 11. But I mean, my view, and this is not a difficult thing to do when you're working in a game studio, is to make everything that I do in my work life playful. Somebody, just before we got on this webinar, somebody had made a mistake. And so that was Ben's fault. So how do we communicate around that? Do we go through some process of formality, kind of thing, or do we laugh about it and use that laughing moment as a way to brainstorm the solution to the problem?
Right.
And so I think that's a way of saying that the whole thing can be made playful, regardless of what you're doing.
Right.
And I think there's tinkering there too. Am I muted?
No, you're good.
You're not.
Right. See, that's play.
You're Dan now.
So yeah. See, I would. Yeah. That's tinkering too. Like, right, with the situation, like you're tinkering with either your language or your social dynamic or whatever. You're kind of messing with it in order to kind of produce effects that you're hoping for.
That's right, and it's also how we've created a culture, and I'm sure, Dan, it's very similar for you guys, of like what failure looks like. Failure looks like an opportunity for conversation, not an opportunity for condemnation.
Right. Oops.
John, are you going to tell me how you play?
Yeah, sure. I think it's like pretty similar, like collaborative work and problem solving, and just sort of like, I don't know, a nice balance between like sort of joking around and being silly and like getting things done and working towards goals. I think that's vague enough. But also, games. Just actually play games. I like board games a lot.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to ask you, and is there any way to get in contact with the Play at Your Org crew there for an opportunity to learn with them? And I don't know if any of you have connection with them, but because that's like on the top of my vision board, dream list, bucket list, whatever you want to call it right now, after watching Office Hours and their description of how they work with teams.
Yeah, I'm happy to put you in touch. I can do that for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can you say how you would envision that in a where, I don't know, what do you see that looking like? What would you like it to look like?
Well, I guess I would love to have a sit-down conversation with them just about how, what resources they're pulling from, what some of their backgrounds are, so that I've got some kind of path to pursue to continue my education around adult play. And then also, hopefully, participating or observing some of the sessions that they're doing with some of the organizations, not because I want to work with organizations, but in order to kind of educate me about, so that I can do the events that I want to do with adults well. Outstandingly. Do any of you have any other suggestions about how they might be helpful? Or maybe another organization that might be helpful, I don't know.
I can't really speak to it that much because I'm not involved in that portion right now. I don't know if you have more connection on that, but
no, nope. So do you have any more questions, Kirsten?
I don't right now. No, you guys are fabulous. Thank you very much.
Awesome. And do you guys have any more comments for Kirsten? No?
Silence.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your work and asking questions. It was really wonderful meeting you and having you on.
It was great. And Jared, I wish I could stay for your presentation. I have to go do evaluations right now. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the show.
Take care.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Bye.
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 I'm having a bit of a video lag. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure. All right, Jared. Hi there. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so let's hear more from you. Could you talk about some of your longer-term goals for XY Flyer and maybe show us a few screenshots of it?
Yeah, I mean, I might be able to show it in action.
Cool.
Let's see if I can get a screenshot working. And, you know, can you guys see this now?
Yes.
Is this working? Okay.
If you could actually
so
zoom in a little bit, is that possible?
Sure. Let me see if I can. Is that better?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. So I'll just show the game real quick. I mean, this game is just one example of the Puzzle School games that I'm working on. They're all kind of similar in the sense of a series of challenges that get harder that have feedback loops. So, for example, in this one, when I drag this sort of equation fragment up into the equation immediately, or the graph immediately changes to reflect the equation. So you immediately get the feedback of what that change did. And so I fly the plane through the rings and I solve the challenge. That one was obviously very easy. So in this one, for example, I might try -8 and the graph shows that I went the wrong direction, so then I can sort of pull it back out and I can go +8. And so, you know, it goes through and it gets progressively more difficult. There's multiple worlds. So here it's dealing with slope and also shifting lines. Over here we've got a little bit more of a variable component, so you can actually move the line around to see how adjusting the variable affects the graph. And then to make it even a little more challenging, there's some that have multiple lines, so you're trying to solve a little bit more complex of a challenge, trying to get the graph to go through these lines. And then it goes into stuff like curves. So you have, I mean, it can model pretty much any equation. So like there, like I just tried putting +5 and it moved the curve up, and what it really wanted to do was move it to the left. So you need to put it inside the parentheses. So again, it's about learning from failure, really instantaneous feedback loops in a safe environment. So failure is very unobtrusive. It doesn't even feel like failure so much at all, so much as it's just oh, okay, that's not the right move. I learned from the mistake as well as from the success, basically. And it goes into, you've got some stuff like, just for the fun of it, some sine curves and stuff like that. So let me see if I can get this one working. and then I fly it through. And then the other component of it, real quick, is the editor, which actually allows you to create your own puzzles. And here, so now you can see, you can completely play around with it. You need to you can drag this guy, move him over here. I can change it to maybe the girl and change all this background stuff and the so now I need to get this island in the right place. So oops. So we'll put her at 0, -4, and I'll add one ring to 1, -3. And now I launch it to solve a puzzle, and I've given a URL that you can share. So basically, so students can create their own puzzles and share with their peers and sort of challenge each other, basically. So both of these components are pretty important. Both the sort of challenges as more of a sort of educational, learn the concepts type thing and go through and make them, and then the actual editor to create your own challenges and challenge your peers. And in the process of creating your own challenges, I found that students tend to actually challenge themselves even more than they do during the game. Like they actually stretch their own knowledge to create the hardest level they can kind of think of. And that actually ends up being one of the more educational environments for the person creating the level, not just the person trying to solve the level. So all of these things, it's about developing hypotheses and testing hypotheses, and that's the core of the puzzles. And because it's so repetitive, you have the ability to sort of pattern match, and really you're working with the content directly. There's very few extraneous things going on. This is pretty much all equations and graphing, but because it's kind of a more exploratory trial and error environment with good feedback loops, it's really quite fun to play, basically. So that's the 2-minute spiel. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to feedback, questions, whatever. I'm also really curious about, I'm approaching this stuff from the perspective of kind of a purely pedagogical perspective, and haven't really had an opportunity to work with schools and classroom environments too much. I've had a little bit of opportunity to do that, but one of my goals is to make at least the theories here more applicable in the classroom and more accessible in the classroom. And I'm not sure if these games are the best way to do it, or if there are ways to make the games more sort of classroom conducive. But I guess those are my sort of main curiosities: feedback and classroom accessibility and stuff like that. So.
Okay, so Jared, this is cool, and actually, John and I were playing with it this morning and had already talked about a bunch of stuff. So it's
cool.
I have a question. I just want to ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
So the first is, and this is a curiosity, and this may be unique to me. When I was playing it, I actually didn't notice the line being drawn and changed. I was focused on the rings, and that's kind of interesting. So my question to you is, why do you draw the line, and how would it change if the line was not part of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the line is the feedback loop. I mean, if you don't notice it, obviously there could be ways to improve it so you do notice it more. I mean, obviously it is somewhat subtle. Making it, a lot of people do suggest that you should have the equation and then make the student do it, and then have the line be drawn afterwards, or have the not have that feedback loop. And I think it's just a matter of how tight you want the feedback loop to be, because you can really control both the challenge as well as the sort of level of frustration and the level of exploration by having the line or taking away the line. And I think my goal is to make, or with these games, is to make them sort of as enjoyable as possible and make it sort of more about pattern matching. So I almost want you to go through more levels more easily rather than be challenged by one level. But I think there's plenty of room for both of those things to take place. But for a beginner, the more tight the feedback loop is, the more opportunity there is for trial and error, for immediately seeing whether or not something worked or not. I think the better opportunity there is for pattern matching and for developing a better sort of visual intuition about how these things work out. But at the end of the day, I think it's worth exploring this game without as tight of a feedback loop and with as tight of a feedback loop. I mean, the feedback loops are really a fascinating way to explore how they affect learning, basically.
Right. So as a game designer, I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
I think there's such a thing as too tight a feedback loop. And so I would give an example of Angry Birds. So if Angry Birds actually it shows you something actually quite similar, right? When you think about the actual play, but what you see is post hoc. You see the sort of vapor trail behind the birds, but it does not show you a preview of where they're going to go, and that's of course very intentional and kind of perfect. So that's one of the first things that struck me is I think I'd rather just throw the airplane. Based on my assumption of what's going to happen, have it leave some kind of vapor trail, or like it sounds like you've already experimented with something like that. But then you're getting to, well, what happens if that just ends up being sort of repeated failure and we're stuck, right? Is that kind of one of your concerns?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this comes back to the sort of a really interesting thing. And Angry Birds is a really good example, I think, because in Angry Birds, I think students, one of the reasons it's fun is because you have an intuition about how this bird is going to behave. And when you throw it, you kind of know because you're used to throwing things in the real world. It follows physics, and you kind of have a sense of how this object's going to behave. With equations and graphing, if you've had no exposure to it, then you actually have zero intuition about what +4 is going to do or what -4 is going to do. So there is a little bit of a difference there in how much scaffolding exists for the player, and that's one of the things that I think is important to explore from my perspective as far as these feedback loops. Like, how can the feedback loops encourage the learning from something that you have very little exposure to begin with? Now, if you already have some intuitive sense of it, it may be more fun to try it without getting that immediate feedback loop and have a little bit more of a risk, a little bit more of a sense of I got it right without having the answer provided to me instantaneously, basically, or I got it wrong or whatever. And I think that dynamic is really interesting dynamic to play around with. I think it's pretty easy for me to allow a teacher or whatever to set that option and just have it be either one way or the other. It doesn't have to be a fixed thing. So
right, and there's options. You can leave that for the student. Go ahead, John. Oh, I was just going to suggest you could even have a toggle within the interface, like light on, light off.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, or like if after a certain number of attempts, like they haven't gotten it, like give them that preview for the first couple or something like that. But I feel like regardless, like having your input like have the real effect, like have it fly in whatever direction you set it to. Like, so that like that's like another area where you could fit in that sort of development of an understanding of how it works when you get it wrong, instead of having it just like drop.
Yeah, that's true. Although it is kind of tough when the line doesn't actually go through where the plane is to have it follow the path. You'd have to like kind of jump down to where the graph is, if that makes sense. The story kind of gets a little convoluted a little bit. But I see what you mean. I think it would be that if it could figure out some way to make that make sense, then having the plane follow the graph no matter what you do might be a very good way to approach that. I mean, I think all these things are I don't know if there's a right answer to this. I think it's a matter of like, depending on the context and the amount of understanding the student already have, and how people look at the challenges. I think there's a lot of opportunity to play around with these feedback loops, and this is what I find interesting, is playing around with feedback loops, basically.
Okay, and that kind of leads a little bit into the next thought that I had. Was I played, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 of these challenges, kind of bouncing around, and they were all the same. There's a series of rings that I'm trying to put the plane through, and I'm going to iteratively solve it through the equations. And I certainly can see that the math itself is getting more sophisticated and interesting, but what happens in the game is actually identical. And that kind of struck me as a missed opportunity of, can there be something about the way it's presented that actually changes over time? And, I don't have like great ideas on that as I sit here right now, but, what John was just saying, like, well, how come the plane doesn't just track? Because if you fail, which you didn't show when you were doing it, if you fail, the little character kind of just drops the plane, right? Like, it just says, no, you were wrong. It doesn't say you did something different. It says you were wrong. And it would be, to my mind, more interesting as a game if it said, actually, if it played out the way you put in the equation, it flies backwards, right? Or it flies off the top of the screen. And then once you've done that and you're actually modeling it not as the line being the sort of adjudicator of success, but as the plane being the adjudicator of success.
Yep.
Now I can create secondary targets, let's say, in the space, or targets that are even hidden, and encouraging the player to like do all kinds of theory making around what different type of equation could I add here that would actually make it land on that platform rather than trying to go through the rings, and allowing the player to in a way feel transgressive, right? Like they're breaking the rules, and in fact what they're doing is building this extremely intuitive understanding of how the thing works.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I think having sort of secondary goals that encourage somebody to take on a more significant challenge if they want to could be a really interesting aspect of it. It is tough to sort of figure that out with the way the storyline exists as it is, but I think there are ways to probably modify the storyline to work with a more adjustable starting point so that it makes sense to have the plane following any sort of curve, no matter what you do. I'll certainly give that some thought. That's certainly an interesting aspect that can be explored.
That's an interesting issue because like we like in designing the classroom experiences here to be more more game-like. Like there's that sort of balance between narrative and story that also has like a nice pull and the actual gameplay. But I mean, as a game designer, I'm usually like the fun comes first. Everything else has to bend to that. Well, I mean, not also in this case, it's the fun and the learning goal. Those are the two things that have to be there, and the narrative can change. But you know, that's up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the, I think that these are all good ideas. I mean, some of the aspects that I'm sort of exploring, the repetitiveness of it, does have some logic behind it at some level. I think having some variation and novelty as you explore would probably just be a good thing. That's really more just a matter of sort of effort of creating a more complex game. But at the end of the day, having exploring patterns and helping somebody who's unfamiliar with the way these systems work sort of recognize patterns and be able to confirm patterns and go through it, have a little bit of repetition. I mean, one of the theories that I'm really working on is that the sense of progress you make as you progress through something is really one of the more enjoyable, intrinsically motivating aspects. And so this game is kind of, at some level, meant to be almost like a minimalistic exploration of that. So, at some level, sort of purposely removing some of the more gamification aspects in order to try to say, is it engaging enough to have somebody just sort of like figuring out the patterns of the stuff, just figuring out the math, and even if it is somewhat repetitive. Although I think at the end of the day, it would be a better product and better experience if there was some of these sort of secondary goals, or maybe if the plane did follow the path no matter what. And it's just a matter of like kind of getting everything to sort of line up around and just the effort involved with building it out, basically. But
Jared, I'll give you just a really quick, fun example. So our group here is a little playful with when we approach these things, and somebody gave us a physics thing that was a skateboard task, right? And you had a kid on a skateboard, and they were going up and down a ramp. It was one of the levels, and somebody figured out how to make the kid go flying off the ramp and off the screen, right? Because it was actually modeling it with physics, which immediately started this huge conversation of like, how do you do that? Well, here's what you have to do. You have to totally crank up the mass, right? And then you put them way over in the corner, and then watch what happens.
Yeah.
Which was super fun, and literally the character disappeared, and you had to reboot the game, which was hilarious. But what happened was clearly we were understanding F equals MA, or else we wouldn't have even thought to try it probably, or at least not been able to reverse engineer it and share it with each other. So the ability to have something that really models like that, I think, invites these other kind of learning opportunities rather than just the you're correct, incorrect.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think the drawing of the line at some level is meant to immediately to sort of avoid the you're correct, incorrect aspect of it. I mean, because you can immediately see if it's going to launch or not. Basically, and obviously, if you miss the line, then that's a different aspect. So that's certainly an important component of it. But I do think, creating an environment that is more simulative, so that if you wanted to, you could just goof around and create a crazy graph that made the plane go in circles and do a loop-de-loop and spell something out in letters in the air or something like that somehow. That would be a more ideal environment, I think, to create it. It's a little tough to balance some of those objectives with maintaining a certain level of complexity with the challenge too. But I think it's worth trying to figure that out.
Right. Well, here's just a thought is so you've got your long list, right, of challenges within a given sort of subject space. You could break that up by saying every sixth one or some number you have to earn this is the open bonus level. And essentially, like all the stuff that you've done so far, like so let's say all we've done so far is stuff with positive, like y equals x plus something. So that's the only tool you have at hand for your bonus level. But what you want to do with it is totally up to you. And you can make it like break bottles. You can make it fly off the screen. Knock yourself out. But this is the tool that you're going to just play with and have fun with. And we do you'd set up some sort of totally game-ish high score rubric. Like how many things can you knock over?
Sure.
Right? Using y equals mx, well, not even mx, y equals x plus b. And then later on you keep adding that. So it also would give the player something to look forward to. Right? Rather than just, I'm grinding through the same stuff. It's like, oh no, every sixth one, something crazy happens. And I've earned it, but here we go.
Well, I don't want the experience to ever feel like you're grinding through stuff. If that's the experience, then that's a mistake to begin with. I think having this stuff feel like excessively repetitive or not challenging. I mean, I think the goal is to kind of create it so that it's, it's kind of like, like Sudoku is an example I like to use, which has zero sort of like fun elements to it. And admittedly, like maybe it's more of an adult game than a kid game. At the end of the day, I think it's, the idea that an appropriate challenge can be a very engaging thing as long as it's an appropriate challenge. I mean, if it feels like a grind, then it's because it's not an appropriate challenge at some level. I do think, having more open-ended challenges and having the ability to explore and do something more interesting could be an interesting novel aspect of it. But I also, if the game is feeling like a grind anyways, I think that's a negative that I need to try to explore, basically.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can
just
have these, like, pretty... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The level editor is really... Oh, okay, sorry. Just that the level editor is really important, and I like it, and it's really helpful to teachers. When we have games here, we find that most of assessment can happen during the game itself, and learning does happen during the games themselves, but when we can create tasks and challenges, especially design challenges about the game or in the game that students can then kind of riff on or whatever, either during or after, then there are kind of artifacts that are left over that the teacher can assess, and that can be differentiated for different skill levels or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, the level editor for me was really almost the priority, and it's almost like I built a game around it to kind of demonstrate it at some level. I mean, the game is also important in the sense of like learning the content and getting familiar with it. If you just try to like sit down at the level editor without playing the game at all, you kind of be like, I don't know what to do. But I think, back to sort of some of the original ideas, I mean, even adding the ability to sort of like knock over bottles or something like that, other goals rather than just rings into the level editor might be a fun way to spice up, the sort of amount of creativity that a student can apply to the level editor too. So that might be a good place to start, just with that even. So I mean, I guess you guys have more experience with sort of the classroom dynamics of this stuff. I mean, is this game in its current form with the level editor and stuff like that? You think something that like a teacher could use effectively in a classroom, or are there aspects of it that would change, or just a completely different approach? I mean, I even wonder like how much these apps and these games on a computer that a person sort of plays individually. I mean, I think the sharing of levels between them sounds like it could work well, but I'd just be curious to hear any thoughts or feedback along those lines.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, please.
I was just going to say that we definitely use similar sorts of things that are single-player experiences in the classroom. Like a lot of the time, sort of like, have a game like this, but like it's fine if you get to a place where like it isn't scaffolded well enough and it's like open-ended, that like it doesn't necessarily, like you can't necessarily figure it out by yourself. Like you are given some other resource, or like you do like the sort of just-in-time like teacher little teaching moments, and things like that. So I mean that's kind of how something like this. What were you going to say, Dan?
I don't know what I was going to say, but what I'll say now is that if I was teaching with this game, I would probably surround it. I mean, I think all the games that we use, we want to surround with valuable activities and actions, but particularly this one, it seems to concentrate on a very valuable learning goal, which is understanding pretty much direct relationships between the slope and the intercept and x and b and whatever. So it's super valuable, but I would, as a teacher, I'd either want to create my own game-like activity, hope that another game-like activity was integrated into this game, or simply do some other kind of lesson or activity around kind of the other side of this, which would be why does something with 4 as a slope go up 4 over 1, which would involve tables of value and just kind of calculating left to right along t-charts and real world examples and everything. So it's kind of obvious, but if I was to use this game, I wouldn't use it by itself. Maybe one class period I could use it by itself, especially with the level editor portion of it. But I'd certainly want to surround it with or integrate it with the why, rather than like I've found these direct relationships. But I want to understand kind of like the numeracy aspect of it a little, which I don't necessarily think should be in the game. It's just teachers would want to put those two things together.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fantastic approach from my perspective too. I mean, I certainly don't. The goal isn't to create something that sort of replaces or immediately bestows upon the student for perfect knowledge of this system sort of thing. And I think having multiple ways of approaching it are very valuable. And just having one tool that provides, I mean, I think just computers provide a fantastic way to simulate environments and explore environments and get feedback loops and stuff like that. But they don't provide a lot of other things that I think a classroom does provide. And combining those two things together is kind of my ideal, basically. So,
as you mentioned before, that you were kind of starting with the level editor. To me, again, I just want to concentrate like that. That's the thing I would concentrate the most on as a teacher after having seen this game, because a lot of what you can do during the gameplay itself, you could do with a graphing calculator, and I could write up some equations I could write something on the board, mimic this, and use your Google Graph or whatever to kind of make it happen. But the fact that you have a pretty granular method for students to kind of create puzzles for each other, that's cool, because then I can give a puzzle to a student, I can annotate my puzzle, I could do a screencast about how I made my puzzle, why I made my puzzle. There seems to be a lot more that I can put around the level editor as a teacher than put around the game level itself right now.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, one of the reasons I got started on the puzzle school was kind of starting from the protege effect of students trying to teach each other. I actually started something else called Upside Down Academy, which is students creating videos to teach each other something, sort of like instead of Khan Academy creating a video for you to learn from, you actually teach a video for somebody at the same level as you, basically. And the protege effect, the idea of like you creating something for somebody else to learn from and learning via that process is something that I'm incredibly fond of, basically. So it is a huge priority for me, basically.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, I would just echo what these guys are saying about the editor. I mean, I was just looking at it because I didn't look at it before, but I watched you play with it, and there's a lot of really nice things in there, and it might be interesting to think about how to introduce even just single or 2 or 3 elements of that editor at a time as part of the complete experience for the student. And you just say, hey, this is part of what this is all about. Here's an equation. Can you draw the rings? Right? You could totally invert it that way.
Sure.
Given the way that you structured this tool. So I just think there's tons of potential there. That's right now just sort of, you see this a lot where game makers make really, really cool things and then they just sort of make a level editor, right? It's like, well, there's lots of cool things in there. And the classic example of this was Will Wright when he made a game called Raid on Bungling Bay, and then he had this awesome level editor that he eventually called SimCity.
Yeah.
And who cares about Raid on Bungling Bay? The level editor was the awesome part.
No, and that's kind of my goal in general. I think the process of creating something is a fantastic process. I think maybe I could expose it better. My kind of goal is to maybe work a little more hands-on with teachers to try to show them how to use a little better, but I could definitely put a little more effort into exposing it through the site and stuff like that, because I think people probably just don't even notice it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean it's data driven, right? And you've already got these drag and droppy tools. I think you could do a lot with it without even having to do that much with the software.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to be a focus of me, especially working with teachers and classes and stuff like that. I try to expose that more and make it more functionality too. Add more things you can do with it. I mean, I think some of the feedback you guys gave is stuff I can immediately add to it right now, basically. Yeah.
Here's just a really simple one. Is just playing with it. Like, let's say I'm going to add a ring. Like right now, my choices are I have to just type in an XY. But if there was sort of a very snappy drag, right, an integer snap, let's say, at least to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would make it like that much more interesting and fun to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dragging around right now is kind of more showy than not, because it's hard to drag it right to a specific location. So. Yeah,
when they're floats as far as I can tell.
Yeah, they got three decimals, so it's I mean, it's tough because some of the equations you're going to do are going to require not digits, not
right.
A couple decimal places basically. So you have to have some flexibility there, but you could maybe turn on sort of snap to grid type stuff and make it a little bit easier basically.
Yeah, and you could even think of that turn on, turn off as being part of the teaching. Like, do you need integers for this, or do you need fractions or decimals?
No, I mean, if there's any teachers watching or listening, I mean, these are the types of ideas that are really fascinating to me, of how to kind of take this tool and make it so it's more useful as a lesson, as just a tool within a classroom, basically. Because I probably wouldn't think of all these ideas myself, basically.
And the other thing that I'll just throw up because I have to, given what we're doing at Glass, is there's all kinds of opportunities to embed assessment into the activity, right? And just that sounds so much easier than it is, but it would be it's right there in terms of like what types of mistakes did you make and what types of assumptions are you making and that kind of thing.
Great. So, Jared, do you have any more questions? I know that Dan needs to leave soon, so feel free to leave when you need to. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jared.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate the feedback.
Cool. So, any more questions or any parting thoughts from MJ or John? Nope.
Not really. I said a lot. I mean, I think this is a cool. I think it's a cool product, and I think as you explore it. I mean, I don't know how many more you've got in the hopper, so you may be moving on, but
no, I mean, I do have about 10 more in the hopper, but it's important. I really want to make this as useful as possible, especially within classrooms. And so the level editor and stuff like that are stuff I'd love to improve upon. So
yeah, and I would just encourage you to go look at the games that are really super engaging. Like look at an Angry Birds and sort of ask why is that engaging specifically? Because most of what's there you can steal.
Great. Well, thanks, guys.
Okay, cool. Yes, thank you, Jared. Thanks for sharing your work and asking your questions. It was really wonderful having you on. So office hours, we will be back next month. I want to thank MJ, Dan, and John for leading today's program, and again, Kirsten and Jared for sharing their work with us live. For updates on office hours, please sign up for our mailing list. Just click the Join Us at the top of this page. Thanks for tuning in, and if you like what we're doing, please spread the word. Have a great afternoon. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Amna.